Leo stacked the chairs, the scrape of metal legs on the worn linoleum floor the only sound in the otherwise silent bar. One by one, they went up on the tables, skeletal and waiting for a morning that felt a lifetime away. He moved with an economy of motion I had come to memorize over the last 6 months, a quiet ballet of closing duties that had become the anchor of my Tuesday and Thursday nights. The broad plane of his back, the way his dark t-shirt stretched when he reached, the effortless strength in his arms. I had cataloged it all from my perch at the end of the bar, nursing a single whiskey for 3 hours, making it last until the world outside had gone quiet, and it was just the low hum of the beer coolers, the clink of glass, and him. He always saved my section for last. I used to think it was a courtesy, a silent acknowledgement of the last patron. But lately, I'd started to let a dangerous little seed of hope take root. I'd noticed the way his eyes would sometimes flick to my reflection in the mirror behind the bar when he thought I wasn't looking. A brief, unreadable glance before he'd go back to wiping down the counter or restocking the gin. Tonight, he finished the last table, leaving my small island of existence untouched. He picked up the final chair, the one from the table nearest me, and instead of hoisting it onto the tabletop, he walked it over. My heart gave a stupid, painful lurch. He stopped at my elbow, the chair held loosely in one hand. The air shifted, thickening with something I couldn't name. He smelled of lemons from the polish and the faint, clean scent of his own skin. "Stay a minute," he said. His voice was low, a little rough from a long night of shouting orders over the din that had long since faded. It wasn't a question. It was a soft command, and it vibrated right through the wood of the bar, up my arm, and into the center of my chest. I could only nod, my throat suddenly tight. He placed the chair on the floor, turning it around so the back was facing me, and straddled it, resting his arms along the top. He was close now, closer than he'd ever been. I could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the tiny fleck of gold in the brown of his left eye, the tiredness etched around them. He just looked at me, his gaze steady and direct, and for the first time, I felt seen. Not as a customer, not as a piece of the bar's furniture, but as me, Julian, the quiet man who painted canvases that nobody ever saw and drank his whiskey neat. My own life felt like a room I was just passing through. I worked a soulless data entry job, lived in a small, sterile apartment, and my most meaningful interactions were with the checkout clerk at the grocery store. Loneliness was a constant, low-grade hum beneath the surface of my days. It wasn't a sharp pain anymore. It had dulled into a chronic ache, a state of being I had accepted. Coming to this bar, watching him, was the only thing that felt real, the only time I felt a flicker of something other than gray apathy. It was a secret, pathetic ritual. And now, the subject of my silent observation was sitting a foot away, breaking all the unspoken rules that had kept me safe in my anonymity. He didn't speak again for a long time. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy, weighted with all the things that hadn't been said over the last 6 months. I watched his hands, strong and calloused, resting on the back of the chair. I had watched those hands slice lemons, tap kegs, carry heavy trays of glasses. I had imagined, in the loneliest hours of the night, what they might feel like. The thought sent a jolt of heat through me, followed by a wave of shame. He was just being nice. This was probably just something he did, a moment of decompression after a long shift. I was reading everything into nothing. My specialty. "You're always the last one here," he finally said, his voice still quiet. "I like the quiet," I managed to say, my own voice sounding foreign and thin. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a grin, nothing so overt. It was a subtle shift, a softening. "It's quiet now." Yes, a brilliant conversationalist, I was not. My mind, usually a whirlwind of overanalysis and anxious projections, was completely blank. All I could focus on was the proximity of him, the clean, masculine scent that was cutting through the stale air of the bar. He leaned forward slightly, resting his chin on his folded arms. The movement was casual, but it brought his face even closer. "I don't even know your name," he said. It was a statement of fact, but it felt like an accusation. All this time, all these hours, and we were strangers. Julian, the name felt strange on my tongue, as if I was introducing a character in a play. "Leo," he replied, and the smile reached his eyes this time. They crinkled at the corners. "So, Julian, What do you do when you're not keeping my bar stools warm? The question was light, teasing, but it landed like a stone in my stomach. What did I do? I existed. I moved from my apartment to my cubicle and back again. I painted feelings I couldn't articulate and hid the canvases under a drop cloth in the corner of my living room. I work in an office. Data entry. I couldn't bring myself to say I was an artist. It felt like a lie, a grand pronouncement for a man who did nothing with his art but create it and then hide it away. Leo nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving my face. He seemed to be searching for something more than the bland answer I'd given him. Data entry, he repeated, as if testing the words. Sounds meticulous. I let out a short, surprised laugh. That's a polite way of saying soul-crushing. The corner of his mouth twitched again. And is it? I found myself being honest. Most days, yes. He was quiet for another moment, just watching me. I felt like a specimen under a microscope, every flicker of my expression, every nervous shift of my weight, being cataloged and analyzed. But it wasn't a clinical observation. It was interested, genuinely interested. It was a feeling so foreign I almost didn't recognize it. He pushed himself off the chair and walked behind the bar. My stomach dropped. It was over. The minute was up. He was going to get back to work, and I would be left to slink out into the night. But he didn't grab a rag or a broom. He took down a clean glass, a heavy, crystal-cut tumbler, and then another for himself. He reached for a bottle on the top shelf, a dark amber liquid I didn't recognize. He poured a generous 2 fingers in each glass. He slid one across the polished wood towards me. Our fingers brushed as I took it. A spark, small and electric, shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. He didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he didn't show it. On the house, he said, leaning his elbows on the bar, mirroring my own posture from moments before. For being my most reliable customer. I lifted the glass, the cool weight of it a comfort in my suddenly clammy hand. The whiskey was smooth, smoky, and it burned a slow, welcome trail down my throat. It loosened something tight in my chest. Thank you. So, data entry, he said, picking up the thread of our conversation as if there had been no interruption. That can't be all there is to you, Julian. I'm an open book. My every thought, every feeling, is written across my face. I have no poker face, no ability to hide the sudden rush of anxiety or the deep-seated melancholy. He sees it. He must see it. I take a sip of the whiskey, the smoky peat a welcome distraction. The liquid fire spreads through my chest, a temporary armor. What makes you say that? I asked, trying to keep my tone light, casual. It came out strained. Leo swirled the amber liquid in his own glass, watching the way it caught the dim light. The way you watch things, he said, his eyes still on the glass. You're not just sitting here, drinking. You're observing. You notice everything. The way the light hits the bottles, the sound the ice machine makes before it dumps a new batch. The way Cheryl, the daytime bartender, always leaves the lemon wedges in a fan shape, and I always leave them in a pile. My breath caught. He had noticed me noticing. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. All this time I'd thought I was invisible, a ghost at the end of the bar, but he had been watching me right back. My carefully constructed wall of anonymity crumbled into dust. I guess I'm just a detail-oriented person, I stammered, the excuse sounding weak even to my own ears. He finally lifted his gaze from his glass and met mine. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a quiet, unnerving perceptiveness. I think you're a painter. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was such a specific, impossible guess. How could he possibly know that? I hadn't told a soul. My art was my most fiercely guarded secret, the one true thing about myself that I kept locked away from a world I was sure would either misunderstand it or, worse, be completely indifferent to it. How? I couldn't finish the sentence. You have a smudge of blue paint, he said, his voice soft. He gestured vaguely towards his own face. Right here, he tapped a spot just beside his left eye. Ultramarine, I think. It's been there all night. My hand flew to my face, my fingers finding the small, rough patch of dried paint on my temple. I'd been working on a piece before I came out, a chaotic swirl of deep blues and violets, trying to capture the feeling of the city at twilight. In my rush to escape my own apartment, I must have missed it. I felt a hot flush of embarrassment creep up my neck. I was exposed. I see, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I scrubbed at the spot with my thumb, but the pigment was stubborn. Leo let out a low chuckle. It wasn't mocking. It was warm, genuine. Don't worry. It's a good color on you. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, his eyes twinkling over the rim of the glass. The teasing was gentle, designed to put me at ease, and to my surprise, it worked. A small, shaky smile found its way to my lips. So you're a painter who does data entry to pay the bills, he concluded, setting his glass down with a soft click. That makes a lot more sense than just a meticulous office worker. I wouldn't call myself a painter, I deflected, falling back on old habits of self-deprecation. I just mess around with it. For myself. The best reason to do it, he said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He started wiping down the counter in front of him, a slow, methodical motion. The domesticity of the act was oddly calming. He wasn't pushing, wasn't prying. He had simply stated a fact and moved on, granting me the space to process my own exposure. We fell into another comfortable silence, the only sounds the soft squeak of his cloth on the wood and the hum of the coolers. I took another sip of my whiskey, feeling the warmth of it settle deep in my bones. The initial shock of being seen was fading, replaced by something else. Something warm and unfamiliar. It felt nice to be known, even in this small way. What about you? I asked, the words coming out before I had a chance to second-guess them. This can't be all there is to you either. The meticulous bartender, I threw his own word back at him, a flicker of boldness I didn't know I possessed. He stopped wiping and looked at me, a genuine smile spreading across his face this time. It transformed him. The tiredness around his eyes seemed to vanish, replaced by a light that made him look younger, more open. Touché, Julian. He leaned against the back counter, folding his arms across his chest. The posture was casual, but it did incredible things to the muscles in his arms and the fit of his shirt. I forced my eyes back to his face. This was my dad's place, he said, his voice taking on a softer, more nostalgic tone. He ran it for 30 years. I grew up in this building. My first drink, my first kiss, it all happened somewhere between that dartboard and the storeroom. He gestured with his head towards the back of the bar. When he got sick, I came back to help out. He passed away 2 years ago. I've been running it ever since. The story settled in the space between us, filling in the gaps of the man I had only known as a silent, efficient presence. It recontextualized everything. This wasn't just a job for him, it was a legacy. His quiet dedication, his late nights, they weren't just for a paycheck. They were for his father. A wave of empathy washed over me. I'm sorry about your dad, I said, the words feeling inadequate. He gave a small, appreciative nod. Thanks. He was a good man. A pain in the ass, but a good man. He pushed off the counter and started rinsing our glasses in the sink, the sound of running water filling the room. I'm trying to sell it, actually. That surprised me. Really? What? It's his dream, not mine, he said, his back still to me. I love this place, but I'm not my dad. I don't want to die behind this bar. I want something else. Something else. I prompted gently. He turned off the water, drying his hands on a towel tucked into his belt. He turned to face me, leaning back against the sink. I want to build things. With my hands. Furniture, maybe. A house, someday. I have this piece of land upstate. Nothing fancy, just a few acres of woods and a creek. I go up there on my days off. Just be quiet. Chop wood. Think. I could picture it perfectly. Leo, surrounded by trees, the scent of sawdust and pine in the air. The image was so vivid, so right, that it made my chest ache. He was a man who knew what he wanted, who had a dream that was tangible and real. And I was a man who hid his dreams under a dusty cloth. That sounds, I searched for the right word. Peaceful. It is, he affirmed. He looked around the empty bar, a complex expression on his face, a mixture of love and weariness. This place is the opposite of peaceful. It's full of ghosts. Good ones, mostly. But they're loud. He pushed away from the sink and walked around the bar, stopping beside my stool. He didn't sit this time. He just stood there, his presence a warm, solid thing in the quiet room. I had to tilt my head back to look up at him. The angle felt vulnerable, exposed. So, he said, his voice dropping to that low, intimate register again. A painter who hides his paintings and a carpenter who slings drinks. We're a pair, aren't we? The we hung in the air between us, a small word with an impossibly large weight. He was including me, creating a connection, a shared space. It was happening too fast. My mind was scrambling to catch up, my internal alarms screaming that this was dangerous territory, that I should retreat to the safety of my shell. But my body was betraying me. I found myself leaning slightly towards him, drawn in by his gravity. "I guess so," I whispered. He reached out, his movement slow, deliberate. I flinched, expecting him to touch my face, to try and wipe away the last of the paint. But his hand went to my shoulder, his fingers curling gently over the fabric of my jacket. The warmth of his touch seeped through the layers of cloth, a steady, grounding pressure. It wasn't a casual touch. It was possessive. It was a claim. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, wild rhythm. I could feel the pulse in my own neck, a frantic counterpoint to the steady calm that seemed to emanate from him. His eyes searched mine, and the playfulness was gone. In its place was an intensity that made it hard to breathe. He was asking a question, a silent, profound one, and he was waiting for my answer. I didn't know what to do. The fear of rejection, of misreading this entire situation, was a cold knot in my stomach. But the fear of letting this moment slip away, of returning to my gray, empty life, was even greater. For once, just once, I wanted to be brave. So I did the only thing I could think to do. I didn't speak. I didn't pull away. I stayed, and I met his gaze. The pressure on my shoulder increased, just slightly. A silent reassurance. His thumb began to move, a slow, hypnotic stroke against my collarbone. It was an impossibly small gesture, but it felt monumental. Every nerve ending in my body was on high alert, focused on that single point of contact. The rest of the world, the empty bar, the sleeping city outside, it all faded away into a muffled blur. There was only the space between us, charged and humming with unspoken energy. His gaze dropped from my eyes to my mouth. It was a deliberate, unambiguous shift. My breath hitched. This is it. This is the moment where the world either cracks open or slams shut. The air grew thick, heavy. I could feel the warmth of his body, smell the clean, faint scent of his soap mixed with the whiskey on his breath. He was so close, so close. He leaned in, his movements agonizingly slow, giving me every opportunity to pull back, to stop him. My mind was a civil war. The scared, lonely part of me screamed to run, to protect myself from the inevitable hurt. But another part, a part one hadn't heard from in years, was whispering, "Stay." It was a quiet, insistent voice, a voice that yearned for connection, for a single moment of genuine, unvarnished contact. I listened to the whisper. I closed my eyes. The world went dark, and my senses narrowed to the sound of his soft exhale, the feeling of his warmth enveloping me. I waited, my entire being coiled in anticipation. A second stretched into an eternity. Then, I felt the soft brush of his lips against mine. It wasn't a kiss of passion, not of demand. It was a question, tentative, gentle, impossibly soft. It was a ghost of a touch, a whisper of contact that sent a shockwave through my entire system. My own lips parted slightly, an involuntary response, an invitation. He took it. The pressure deepened, and the kiss became real. It was slow, unhurried, a conversation without words. It tasted of smoky whiskey and a longing so profound it mirrored my own. His other hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking the line of my stubble. The touch was anchoring, possessive. It said, "I'm here. This is real." I brought my own hand up, my movements clumsy and uncertain, and rested it on his waist. I could feel the hard muscle beneath his shirt, the solid reality of him. A small, broken sound escaped my throat, a sound of surrender, of a dam breaking after a lifetime of holding back. He pulled back, just an inch, resting his forehead against mine. His eyes were still closed. We were breathing the same air, our heartbeats a frantic, unsynchronized duet. "Julian," he breathed, my name a prayer against my lips. I couldn't speak. I could only open my eyes and look at him. His own were dark, his pupils blown wide. The intensity was still there, but it was softer now, mingled with a vulnerability that stole my breath. In his eyes, I saw my own reflection, and for the first time, I didn't see a lonely, pathetic man. I saw someone who was wanted. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with the deafening roar of what had just happened. The world had tilted on its axis. The unspoken had become spoken. The barrier between us, the physical bar, and the invisible walls I had built around myself, had been obliterated. And I was terrified. The morning after dread arrived before the night was even over. My mind, which had been blessedly silent during the kiss, came roaring back to life. What have you done? He was just lonely. It was the whiskey. It was the late hour. He'll regret this in the morning. You'll be that sad, clingy customer he has to avoid from now on. The familiar chorus of self-sabotage began its ugly song. I must have tensed, because Leo's thumb, which had been gently stroking my jaw, stilled. He pulled back a little further, enough to search my face. The vulnerability in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of concern. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low and rough. I couldn't meet his eyes. I dropped my gaze to the worn floorboards, to the scuff marks left by 1,000 nights of other people's lives. I should go, I mumbled, my hand falling away from his waist. The loss of contact felt like a physical blow, a sudden plunge into cold water. I started to slide off the bar stool, my legs feeling unsteady. My only thought was to escape, to get back to my sterile apartment, to the safety of my solitude, where I could replay this moment over and over again until I had dissected it into meaninglessness. Leo's hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around my wrist. His grip wasn't harsh, but it was firm, unyielding. "Hey," he said, his voice soft but insistent. "Look at me." Slowly, reluctantly, I lifted my head. He was watching me with that same unnerving perception, as if he could see right through my flimsy excuses and into the panicked heart of me. "Don't," he said. "Don't what?" "Don't run," he clarified. "Don't overthink this. Don't disappear into your own head. Just stay for another minute." He used the same words he had at the beginning of the night, but this time they carried a different weight. Before, it had been an invitation. Now it was a plea. He saw my flight response, my instinct to retreat, and he was actively, gently, trying to stop it. My first instinct was to pull away, to insist that I had to leave. It was the safe thing to do. But his grip on my wrist was a warm, living anchor in the swirling storm of my anxiety. And his eyes were holding me captive. There was no pity in them, no regret, just a steady, unwavering calm, a quiet strength that I found myself wanting to lean on. I sagged back onto the stool, the fight going out of me. "Okay," I whispered. He let out a slow breath, his shoulders relaxing slightly. He didn't let go of my wrist. Instead, his thumb began to trace small, soothing circles over the sensitive skin on the inside of my arm. The simple, repetitive motion was calming my frantic pulse, short-circuiting my panic. "I've wanted to do that for a long time, Julian," he said, his voice utterly sincere. "For months. Every time you walked in here and sat in this exact spot, I've wanted to walk over, lock the door, and kiss you." The confession was so direct, so baldly honest, that it shocked me out of my own internal monologue. All my carefully constructed theories, that he was just lonely, that it was a whim, that I had misread everything, evaporated. "You have?" The question came out small, incredulous. "Yeah," he said with a small, self-deprecating smile. "I'm not exactly subtle. I thought you knew." "I hoped," I admitted, the honesty feeling like a stone I was finally setting down. "But I didn't think." "I'm not." I trailed off, not knowing how to articulate the litany of my own perceived inadequacies. "You're not what?" he prompted gently. "I'm just me," I finished lamely. "Yeah," he said again, his eyes softening. "That's kind of the point." He finally let go of my wrist, but only to move his hand to my knee, a warm, solid weight. "Listen, it's late. I have to finish closing this place up. But I don't want this to be the end of the night." My heart gave a hopeful leap. "Let me walk you home," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of intent. "And maybe, tomorrow, you could show me some of those paintings you're hiding." The offer was twofold: an immediate continuation and a future promise. It was more than I had ever dared to hope for. The fear was still there, a low hum in the background, but for the first time, it was being drowned out by a wave of pure, unadulterated hope. "Okay," I said, and this time, my voice was steady. "Okay, Leo." The smile he gave me then was brilliant. It lit up his entire face, and I felt the warmth of it clear down to my toes. He gave my knee a final, reassuring squeeze before turning to finish his tasks. He worked quickly now, a man with a purpose. He mopped the floors, cashed out the register, and switched off the neon signs in the window, plunging the room into a deeper, more intimate darkness. The only light came from the single bulb he left on over the bar. I just sat and watched him, my mind strangely quiet. I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a feeling of rightness. I was in a closed bar in the middle of the night with a man I barely knew, and yet, I felt safer and more myself than I had in years. When he was finally done, he grabbed his jacket from a hook by the back door and slung it over his shoulder. He walked over to me, holding out his hand. "Ready?" he asked. I looked at his outstretched hand. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like a crossroads. Taking it meant stepping out of the bar, out of this magical, liminal space, and into the real world. It meant leaving the safety of my observation post and actively participating in my own life. It was the scariest and most wonderful thing I could imagine. I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm and strong. He pulled me gently to my feet. "Yeah," I said, my voice full of a confidence I didn't know I possessed. "I'm ready." He led me to the front door, his hand firmly in mine. He unlocked the deadbolts, the heavy clunk of the metal echoing in the silent room. He pushed the door open, and the cool night air washed over us, carrying the scent of rain and sleeping concrete. The walk to my apartment was only 10 blocks, but it felt like a journey to a new country. We walked in a comfortable silence, our linked hands a constant, reassuring presence between us. The city was asleep, the streets empty and slick with a recent shower. The streetlights cast long, golden halos on the wet pavement. It felt like the world had been cleared just for us. I found myself noticing things I'd never seen before on this familiar route. The intricate ironwork on a brownstone's fence, the way a single, stubborn rose was still blooming in a window box, the muted colors of a mural on a brick wall. It was as if kissing him had switched my world from black and white to color. Or maybe, I had just finally opened my eyes. Leo's presence beside me was a solid, comforting warmth. He walked with a steady, unhurried pace, his shoulder occasionally brushing against mine. I was acutely aware of every small point of contact, every shift in the pressure of his hand holding mine. My internal monologue, for once, wasn't a litany of anxieties. It was a simple, looping refrain. This is happening. This is real. When we reached the stoop of my building, we stopped under the dim glow of the porch light. The moment felt charged again, a new threshold to cross. He turned to face me, his hand still holding mine. "So this is you," he said, looking up at the unassuming brick facade. "This is me," I confirmed. He didn't let go of my hand. He just stood there, looking at me, his expression unreadable in the shadowy light. The silence stretched, and the old anxieties began to creep back in at the edges. Was this it? Would he say good night and walk away, leaving me to wonder if any of it had been real? As if sensing my rising panic, he lifted my hand, the one he was still holding, and brought my knuckles to his lips. He pressed a soft, warm kiss to my skin. The gesture was so unexpectedly tender, so intimate, that it made my knees feel weak. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice a low promise against my hand. "What time?" Relief washed over me in a dizzying wave. "Any time," I said, maybe a little too eagerly. "Afternoon is good. I don't have to work." I had every intention of calling in sick. Data entry could wait. My life, it seemed, could not. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile. 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock is perfect. Good. He finally, reluctantly, released my hand. The loss of his warmth was immediate and sharp. "Get some sleep, Julian." "You too, Leo." He held my gaze for a moment longer, then turned and walked down the steps, his footsteps echoing softly on the pavement. I watched him until he turned the corner at the end of the block, a solid silhouette disappearing into the night. I stood on my stoop for a long time after he was gone, the feeling of his lips still tingling on my knuckles. I felt light, untethered, as if I could float right up into the dark sky. I finally went inside, my key fumbling in the lock. My apartment, usually a symbol of my solitude, felt different. It felt expectant, hopeful. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed, replaying every moment, every word, every touch. I analyzed the way his eyes had crinkled when he smiled, the low timbre of his voice, the feeling of his thumb stroking my wrist. But this time, the analysis wasn't born of anxiety. It was a joyful cataloging, a committing to memory of the beginning of something new. The next morning, I called in sick to work, my voice clear and steady, devoid of the usual feigned coughs. It felt like an act of rebellion. I spent the morning in a state of nervous energy, cleaning my already clean apartment, arranging and rearranging things on my shelves. I pulled the drop cloth off my paintings, letting them see the light of day. They looked back at me, canvases full of chaotic color and repressed emotion. They were a map of my loneliness. I looked at the most recent one, the swirl of ultramarine and violet. I touched the spot on my temple where the paint had been. It was a mark of my secret self, a self that Leo had seen and, instead of questioning it, had simply accepted. He hadn't asked me to explain it. He had just named the color. As 2 o'clock approached, my nerves kicked into high gear. What if he didn't show up? What if he'd woken up this morning and regretted everything? I paced my small living room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was a fool to have believed it. It was too good to be true. And then, precisely at 2 o'clock, my buzzer rang. The sound cut through my spiral of panic. I stood frozen for a second, my breath held tight in my chest. It rang again, a short, insistent buzz. I scrambled for the intercom, my hand shaking as I pressed the talk button. "Hello," I managed. "It's Leo." His voice crackled through the small speaker, and the sound of it was the most reassuring thing I had ever heard. "Come on up," I said, pressing the button to unlock the lobby door. "It's apartment 3B. I rushed to my own door, unlocking it and leaving it slightly ajar. I could hear his footsteps on the stairs, a steady, solid tread that was coming closer. Coming for me. I smoothed down my shirt for the 10th time, ran a hand through my hair, and tried to remember how to breathe normally. He appeared at the top of the landing, his form filling my doorway. He wasn't in his work clothes. He was wearing a simple gray Henley and jeans, and he looked different, younger, more relaxed. In his hands, he held a brown paper bag that smelled deliciously of fresh coffee and pastries. "Hi," he said, a small, shy smile on his face. In the daylight, away from the moody darkness of the bar, he seemed more real, more human. And somehow, that was even more intimidating. "Hi," I breathed back. "You came." I said I would. He replied, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. He stepped inside, and my small apartment immediately seemed to shrink around his presence. He looked around, his eyes taking in everything. The sparse furniture, the stacks of books, the canvases leaning against the wall. His gaze lingered on the paintings, a curious and respectful light in his eyes. "I brought coffee," he said, lifting the bag. "And apologies in advance if I got the wrong kind of pastry. I guessed you were a croissant person. You seem like a man who appreciates layers." The observation was so specific, so insightful, and so perfectly him that I let out a genuine laugh. The tension in my shoulders eased. "I am a croissant person," I confirmed. "And you are a mind reader." "Only when it comes to pastries and painters," he said, his smile widening. I took the bag from him, our fingers brushing again. This time, I didn't pull away. I savored the brief contact. "The kitchen is this way," I said, leading him through the living room. He followed, his eyes still scanning the paintings as he passed them. He didn't say anything, but I could feel his attention on them, a silent, thoughtful appraisal. I felt a familiar flicker of vulnerability, but it was tempered by a strange sense of pride. I wanted him to see them. I wanted him to see me. In the kitchen, I set about making plates and pouring the coffee into mugs, my hands busy with the familiar tasks. Leo leaned against the counter, watching me with that same quiet intensity from the night before. "So this is where the magic happens," he said, gesturing with his head back towards the living room. "I don't know about magic," I said, handing him a mug of coffee. "It's more like wrestling with my own brain and losing, most of the time." "Looks like you win sometimes," he said, his voice sincere. He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes meeting mine over the rim of the mug. "They're incredible, Julian. Really. The colors, it's like you're painting feelings, not things." The compliment landed squarely in the center of my chest, a warm, spreading bloom. He got it. He actually got it. He hadn't just seen a mess of colors. He'd seen the intent behind them. I felt a lump form in my throat. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. We ate the croissants in a comfortable silence, the only sounds the clink of our mugs and the flaky crunch of pastry. The afternoon sun streamed through my small kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was a simple, domestic scene, the kind of quiet intimacy I had only ever read about in books or seen in movies. And it was happening in my kitchen, with him. When we were finished, he took our plates and rinsed them in the sink, an easy, natural gesture that spoke of a shared space I wasn't used to. I watched the muscles in his back move under his shirt, just as I had 100 times at the bar, but this time it was different. This time he was here, with me. He turned from the sink, drying his hands on a dish towel. All right, he said, his eyes alight with a new purpose. Show me your favorite 1 inch. He wanted more. He wasn't just being polite. He was genuinely interested. I led him back into the living room, my heart beating a little faster. I walked over to the stack of canvases, my hands hesitating over them. Which one to choose? Each one was a raw, exposed nerve. I finally pulled one out from the middle of the stack. It wasn't my most technically proficient, but it was my most honest. It was a canvas dominated by a single, solitary figure, rendered in muted grays and blues, standing on a shoreline. But instead of an ocean, the figure was looking out at a vast, chaotic sea of vibrant, explosive color. It was a painting about loneliness, but also about the overwhelming beauty of the world that existed just outside of it. I turned it around and leaned it against the wall, not saying anything. I just stood back and let him look. Leo walked closer, crouching down to see it better. He was silent for a long time, his eyes tracing the lines and shapes, taking in the contrast between the muted figure and the vibrant world. I held my breath, waiting for his verdict. His opinion, I realized with a jolt, mattered more to me than anyone else's. Finally, he looked up at me from his crouched position, his expression serious, thoughtful. This is it, isn't it? He said softly. This is you. I could only nod, my throat too tight for words. He had seen past the paint, past the canvas, and straight into the heart of me. He had looked at my most vulnerable, hidden self, and had not flinched. He had understood. He stood up, his gaze never leaving mine. He closed the small distance between us in 2 steps. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. He simply reached out and cupped my face in his hands, his palms warm and calloused against my skin. He looked at me for a long, silent moment, his eyes full of a deep, quiet understanding that felt more profound than any declaration of love. And then he kissed me again. This kiss was different from the one in the bar. There was no tentative question in it. It was a statement. It was a confirmation. It was slow and deep and sure, a kiss that spoke of acceptance and recognition. It was a kiss that said, I see you. All of you. And I'm not going anywhere. I melted into him, my hands coming up to grip his forearms. I kissed him back with everything I had, with all the years of loneliness and longing, with all the hope for a future I had never allowed myself to imagine. It was a release, a homecoming. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, just as he had the night before. But this time, there was no fear, no uncertainty. There was only a quiet, powerful sense of rightness. I'm not a man who believes in much, Julian, he whispered, his breath warm against my skin. But I think I'm starting to believe in this. And in the quiet of my sun-drenched apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my own hidden heart, I believed in it too. The hum of loneliness that had been the soundtrack to my life for so long had finally, blessedly, gone silent. In its place was a new sound, the steady, reassuring beat of 2 hearts, finally in the same room. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to turn the page. I felt as though I'd come home.